Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Today y Mañana. I'm Alex. This is Xavier.
Good morning.
We're super excited to have you joining us this morning on what is definitely a café con leche. Stay inside, watch Today y Mañana.
Yeah, nice warm café con leche.
Yeah, get warm, get cozy. Watch Today y Mañana. If you're not able to get warm or cozy, I am sorry for you. I am truly sorry. I know what it feels like because I was up at...
well, that means that they're outdoors.
That means you're outdoors.
If you're indoors, you most likely are.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. If you're outdoors and you have to be out today...
You may not be cozy, but at least you should be warm.
If you have to be out today, I truly do. I truly sympathize.
Absolutely.
I truly sympathize
with
that situation. But we'll do our best to bring some warmth and illumination to your day.
Okay.
You know, this is, as you probably heard in the opening, this is when Xavier and I get together and we have to do a finance topic day.
Yeah.
You just get two grouchy guys complaining about you can't see the puck on hockey.
Wait. I'm not grouchy. I only get grouchy.
You sound like those old people that, you can't see the puck on the TV.
Oh, well, that's different. I mean,
so this is what you get. So with us. But Monica Miller joining us this morning from Montana. Thank you so much for tuning in,
Monica.
Must
be nice and warm in Montana,
yeah,
right?
I mean, Montana's probably the only place that's colder than here right now. So, yeah, we're all here complaining about rain and 38 degrees, and they're probably at like minus 10 snow.
Yeah.
And so we sympathize, too. So I hope Monica is warm.
And cozy.
And cozy with a café con leche or something nice.
Or something, yes.
Watching some Today Mañana. So we appreciate that. Be sure to send us any comments, like, share. Love being here on the I Love CVille Network set.
You stole my line, you know that. I was waiting and waiting. Don't forget to like and share.
What's the last thing they have to do?
And subscribe.
There you go. There you go. That's the key in Xavier Moments.
I mean, I just kept that in my head. It's like, wait a minute, you just told me. You just said what I was supposed to say.
Love being here. Thanks to Emergent Financial Services. Thanks to our great partners, Matthias, Realty, Craddock Serious Insurance, Forward Adelante, Charlottesville Opera. We love them all.
All of them.
So
Absolutely.
we appreciate all our fantastic partners. So I mean, there is a lot to talk about on a finance topic day.
Yeah, if you're ready, so there's these three little bits that I had read, right? Mm-hmm. And one of them really caught my eye because I'm trying to figure out what was the purpose of this, right? And so maybe you can enlighten me as to what you think the purpose of this, right? So it says so-called ghost jobs. And this comes from the Wall Street Journal.
Okay.
The roles that companies advertise but have no intention of filling may account for as much as 1 in 5 jobs advertised online.
That's a lot.
Well, what's the point of that again?
Why
what's
put
the
out a job?
What's the purpose of that? Because it really kind of, I just don't have the knowledge and understanding of why I do that.
That's a strange one.
Yeah.
Like, why would you advertise?
Why would you advertise for a job you're not willing to fill?
Unless, you want people to think that you're
growing, the business is booming. And
that's the only thing to think of is you want to give the impression that you're growing, your business is booming, and you just you don't actually.
So wait a minute. So you see that online and you apply, and what are they saying? Oh, it's been filled, or gee, we made a mistake. We're not looking for it.
You think eventually you'd figure it out. It's like, wait a second, this job hasn't been filled in like a year.
Yeah.
You're telling me they couldn't find any qualified
candidates
in the entirety of that time and to fill this job.
So, I mean, that was one of those statistics where I read, I said, I can't believe that. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense to me why somebody would do that, right?
Yeah, that is a strange.
And then the other one was, this one also is a little bit troubling to me, right? Software fixes, and this comes from the Financial Times. Software fixes made up 15% of U.S. recalls last year, up from 6% 5 years ago, according to National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. So what does that mean? That safety in traffic is going down because their software is lousy or no good?
I think it tells you, one, it's probably a function of how many more cars have software, like are essentially computers now,
right,
as opposed to just a typical, like normal, what you and I think of as a normal car, which is that it's doesn't actually have a computer in there. It just, you turn it on and it runs.
It runs, yeah, like the
good old days. But I think
days.
The more cars have software, the more you're going to see that. And two, that's not exactly a good sign of like the decline of the quality of the software it's having. I think it seems to me that more and more cars are trying to do too much.
I agree.
We see it because we've seen some of the newer cars, and you go in there to test run this thing, and there's no more like actual buttons. The whole thing's a screen.
A screen, yes.
And I'm like,
Oh, I hate that.
It seems to me, first off, it seems to be just so highly unsafe that what used to be the air conditioning button is now open up this screen and do the thing. I mean, am I supposed to be, what if someone wants to increase the
you're not
fan?
supposed to be texting, but it's okay looking at a screen to try to figure out which is the screen that I need to figure out.
Exactly,
it's like the air condition, the heat, or my heated seat is too hot. How do I change? Yeah, it's crazy.
So much more that's on there, many more distractions. But I think when you do that, right, because I think about a button is pretty simple. If you notice, that's why the most important stuff, that why is the hazard light still a button and not on the screen? Because the hazard light is a key safety feature, and a button is safe. You press the button, it causes the hazard light to come up. If it's a computer screen, I mean, there's so many more things that can go wrong.
Yeah, what if the screen's not working? Then what do you do?
I mean, you're blind. If you would have put key safety stuff on there, which is why I think they don't do it. If you notice, the hazard lights are never on the computer screen. The hazard light is still on a button because you can't legally be driving if you can't put on hazard lights.
Yeah.
It's a basic feature. But I think it goes to show you that's part of the problem when these cars become more and more advanced.
Yeah, and more people, more cars needed, and it's like the software is like, don't worry about it.
Yeah, I talked about this with I think it was on Jerry's Midday show, the actual I Love CVille show, that we were talking with Judah about the fact that you don't own anything anymore.
Right.
That like you do with these sophisticated cars, because I think it was in the news that BMW was charging a subscription for the heated seats in Europe.
Yeah.
And you're like, the physical heated seat is there.
It's already there.
Like, in other words, they're not charging you to install the heated seat. The heated seat is in the car. So what they've done is installed a piece of software that prevents you from using the heated seat that's in the car that you bought, unless you pay a subscription. And you're like, do I own my car or not? I bought this car. This car is physically mine. And yet you have installed software which prevents me from using it.
Worse than that is, what else can they control in your car, right? I mean, I'm pretty sure that if they wanted to stop our cars at any given point in time, they probably could, just hacking into our car.
Was it Washington State? Washington State wants to mandate. There's a bill going through Washington State that would mandate one of those, Washington, Oregon, or California. Take your pick. Okay, I can't remember which of the states. There's a bill that would mandate that at a certain point, cars have to be installed with the ability to put a speed limit control for people who have, I guess, had a ticket for speeding.
So,
in other words, you get a ticket for speeding.
So in other words, you're driving, you want to go past 60 in a 60 mile an hour, it won't let you.
It won't let you. It will actually, because you got a ticket for speeding, the car now turns on a software feature that if you attempt to go more than 60, it will stop you from doing it. And I'm like, I can think of so many reasons why that would be a disaster.
Exactly.
Like, what if there's an actual emergency and you need to break speed limit? What if you're in a car, the person next to you in the car has a heart attack and you need to get to the hospital? Say, well, sorry, can't go more than 45 and 45 miles. This street is 25 miles an hour. Said, but the person next to me is dying.
Yeah.
Too bad. You can't go more than 25. I can think of so many reasons why you might actually need to break speed.
But you get stuck behind a truck that's going 58 miles an hour, right?
And you can't pass them.
And you can't pass them. And you can't see around them. So it's like, I'd rather be in front than behind them, right? In a sense, if I want to see what's in front of me.
Can't pass them.
But you can't pass them.
Can't pass them. Just because you got a speeding ticket
you
and now your car physically prevents you. Yeah. I'm telling you, it's only a matter of time before you get the Tom Cruise Minority Report. He's trying to escape.
Right.
And then they turn his car around to make him go back. And it's like, uh-oh. Yeah. But I think it goes speaks to that. Do you own it or not? Yeah. And there are some laws, I think, going through the books which would change the way a lot of businesses work. For instance, you've encountered it now, right? How do printers make money for the company?
The toner.
The printer is cheap. The toner is expensive.
Exactly.
What have they done, though? They've installed software in the printer that will not recognize any toner, even if it fits, that is not registered by that company. And there is something making its way through the courts saying, are you allowed to do that, or is that an illegal monopolistic practice? In other words, if a third-party company can make toner that fits into your printer, is it legal for the printer company to put a software fix that says, no, because we didn't make that toner, we won't allow it to be used in this printer, even though it functionally fits that printer, and it would work if you didn't install the software fix. And it's working its way to the Supreme Court because that would fundamentally change the way things work. In other words, when I buy a printer, who owns the printer?
Yeah.
Legally, I own the printer. If that printer breaks, the company's not on the hook for that printer.
Exactly.
And yet they're doing things which prevent me from utilizing full ownership of that printer. And so that's actually working its way to the Supreme Court. And that would change the way a lot of these companies function because a lot of them make money by using software to prevent you.
They would just have to change the price of the printer, right? The printer
they would
then
have to
be
change
more
the price
expensive.
of the printer, but the price of the toner would come down.
Exactly, yeah. Because now, I mean, let's be honest, I realize that sometimes it's like we print like 100 pages before, no, it says we need a new toner.
We just bought a new printer for the office
and
that
this is ridiculous.
Highly rated in terms of its functionality.
Well, the quality is beautiful.
Quality, good. It's known as one of the cheaper toners.
Yeah.
The printer was $300. Every toner was $200.
Wow.
By 2 toners, you've paid double the price of the printer.
Holy Toledo. I didn't realize that.
Yeah. So but they're all like that now.
I got to stop printing these papers.
Our previous printer was like 200 and something.
Yeah.
Every toner is $92.
I know.
One color thing is $92. By the time you buy 4 toners, I've doubled the printer cost. The printer was cheap compared to the toner, but it's because there's no price pressure. You can't use somebody else's toner.
Maybe they're trying for you not to print so many papers.
Yeah, I don't think they want you to buy the paper too.
The other way around.
I think it speaks to when I bought that printer, who owns the printer?
Yeah.
Me or the company that sold it to me? And I think if that changes, that would change the way that works.
That's a good point. That's a good point. I never thought of it that way. But that's
and I think it has applications. A lot. They do this for a lot of things. Parts. A lot of computer companies make it so that you can't replace a part unless it's the official part.
Yeah.
And it's like, but if I own the computer and I'm smart enough to make a part.
I bet it's going to happen to cars too if they're using all this software and all these little parts.
Exactly. You can't use unless you use official.
Yeah, unless you buy that, with the Audi or the BMW or the Porsche or the Ford or the GM, whatever
the software
car you
will
own.
Prevent you from using it.
You can't use any part except that.
Exactly. Yeah. Which I think, and a lot of people are challenging that in court, saying, no, if I bought this car, if you have transferred ownership of this vehicle, how can you restrict me
from doing whatever I want
to this vehicle? Yeah. So I've had the right to fix or something. But it is actually working its way. I don't know if the Supreme Court is taking it up or if it's working its way through the appellate courts to get there. So that's something to keep in mind as to how a lot of these companies make money. Because they're making money on software.
Well, I mean, that almost comes down to all the regulations that we see. Remember when we lived in Carmel, right? So when you put in a window, the outside of the window, right, had to be wood. You couldn't have, those windows that have the, not the plastic. The wood plastic, plastic, the covering and all that sort. You couldn't do that. It had to be wood, right? And you sit there and go, between the fog and, you buy the water, there's tremendous humidity. I mean, you're painting these windows like every 2 years, otherwise they rot quickly. And it's like, there was a rule. You say you couldn't do that. It's like, why? It's my house. I should be able to put any window I want on this house, right?
Exactly. It comes down to, I think we're revisiting the question of ownership.
Yeah.
Who owns it? And I think that's coming into play in a lot of ways with people, and it's coming into play in some ways in the stock market as well, because we've seen it in the way that large companies that don't actually own shares control the share prices. We see this where the big, fund companies, the Vanguards, the BlackRocks, and so forth, are exercising.
That's right.
They're basically controlling the boards of companies, your Exxons and so forth. They don't own the shares. Individual people in 401ks own these shares, but because they've given their proxy and they don't want to deal with it, because if you have a 401k, I don't want to deal with proxy. These companies have enormous power despite not actually owning the shares to which they have control.
But in that case, I mean, people have given up the right to vote on their proxies, right? And I'm sure that most people have no clue what they're voting for in the first place. I don't think they even
know that they've given up the right to proxies. It's an automatic thing.
But even if they know, it's
would they still do it?
Yeah, would they still do it? And would they just simply say, Over here it says vote for all these candidates. Okay, boom, vote, right? Because most people don't do the kind of research
but
that they should be doing.
It's an interesting thing that, like, the concept of ownership has changed.
Yes.
Who owns it? The person that technically, legally owns it, or the person who actually exercises control?
Yeah.
Over
I think we know the answer to that.
Yeah.
Right now.
Exactly. So it's it's actually it reminds me, we saw that Dune movie last year.
Yeah.
There's a point where in the Dune movie the person says, I think it's the main guy, says that the one who can destroy a thing is the one who has true control of it. It's just interesting that you don't own it, but just I have the ability to destroy it. And it's an interesting concept that who actually owns something. And it's the person who can stop you from using it.
That's right, yeah.
And at what point, if they can stop you from using your heated seat, do you own the heated seat or do they own the heated seat?
They do.
Yeah.
No doubt about it. Yeah, exactly.
It's an interesting concept. What was the third thing on your... I know you had three things.
Well, this was, I guess this was also from the Wall Street Journal. Basically, it was talking about how, people are tipping less at restaurants simply because, prices have gone so much that they go and they're paying so much more that the full-service restaurants, their tip is down to 19.3% for the 3 months ending September 30th. But it didn't say what it was before, but it says... that it is down, and this comes from, according to Toast, T-O-A-S-T, which operates restaurant payment systems.
Yeah.
So which is what you would expect, right? I mean, when prices of anything go up, and you're going out to a restaurant, and all of a sudden, you used to pay $10 for a hamburger, and now I'm paying $15. And you say, if I pay 20%, I'm paying 20% on 15, but it's the same hamburger that used to cost me 10.
Exactly.
So maybe instead of leaving 20% on 15, I'm going to leave 20% on what I think is fair, right?
Exactly.
Whatever they come up with, right? So that happens. You would expect.
Which you can see. It's just a sign of where people's discretionary.
I think it's and let's face it. I think what happened is really how quickly prices rose over the last 4 or 5 years, right? So I think that's the key, right? In other words, how quickly, in less than 4 years, really, how quickly they rose, right? And by the magnitude. So it wasn't a situation because, we constantly have inflation. Whether you have inflation of 2% or 3%, that means over time, right? In about 10 years, if you multiply by 2, that's 20%. That's something went up. So you see the impact, right? But it's slow and mature, right? It's like getting old. You go from 40 years old to 50. You look in the mirror.
Well, and your wages may keep up in the sense that your wages may be stagnant in the sense that every year I did a 3% raise. Every year the prices are 3% more expensive. I don't feel like I've gotten a raise, but at least I can buy the same things I bought last year.
Yeah.
But nobody's...
Or even if it's 3 and 2, it's only 1% difference.
But nobody's salary went up 9% in 2022.
Yeah. Well, somebody actually did a study. It's interesting. So someone did a study, the returns over the last 4 years versus the returns of the previous 4 years, right? Because when you compare them, they're very similar in reality as far as market returns. So, you can't say, last administration allows the returns to the previous. You can't say things like that, right? Because the returns are in. But when they adjusted for inflation, it was incredible how much better the previous 4 years had done versus last year.
Exactly.
Because inflation erodes the value of your money.
If you earn, in a year in which you earn 20% in the stock market and inflation's 10, okay, you have 20% more money, but when you go to actually use that money, it's worth 10% less, meaning you only earned 10.
10%, exactly.
Your return got cut in half.
Yeah.
So you take a year like 2022, consider, right? Most people looked at 2022 and you looked at the negative return in the stock market, you looked at the negative return of bonds, right? What you don't often think to do is add to that negative return -9.
Yeah.
Because that's what inflation was that year. So whatever you returned, whatever money you lost in the stock market in 2022, you lost 9% more.
That's right. Yeah.
Because the whatever money you had left was worth 9% less.
Yeah. The value of your dollar.
Exactly, and that's such a powerful piece. And I think the problem is, and I think what has led to where we are now with the way people's spending behavior has changed, and the concern that led to these changes is people. Right. If you went to the average person, right, and you said, okay, look, I'm going to employ you again. In other words, you lost your job to China. I'm going to give you this job back, but everything will be 10% more expensive, right? the person probably says, I'll take that. Because, yes, everything is 10% more expensive, but I went from not having a job to now having a job. Or I went from a job working in McDonald's to a well-paying industrial manufacturing job. Right? So you've increased my cost of living, but you have given me something in exchange, right? Likewise, okay, you bring all the medicines back. You say, okay, medicine may cost you more expensive, but if the next time there's a pandemic, we will not have a shortage of, Tylenol.
Yeah.
Right? People say, okay, I can see that trade, right? Will it cost me a little more to get Tylenol? Yes, but I now have the assurance that I will not be relying on Tylenol from China, who may shut down and not give me anything.
Any country, and it's not just China.
I think the frustration, any country.
Yeah.
The frustration of the last 4 years is people sit there and say, everything is now 25 to 40% more expensive. I didn't get a better job. My job is the same. My wages didn't go up that much. The stuff is still made in China. We didn't bring back anything. So I think the frustration is I got nothing out of it.
Right.
Like everything costs more, but I didn't get anything out of this, which is the classic Milton Friedman inflation. In other words, when you print too much money and there's too few goods, you don't get anything, right? You don't get more goods because there's too few goods. There was supply chain issues. So you didn't get more stuff. You didn't get more jobs, right? Okay, maybe you got back the job you temporarily lost in the pandemic, but you're like, okay, yeah, that's the same. You told me not to go to work, and now you're telling me to go to work. I'm in the same
job, exactly.
Same job, right? So the too much money chasing too few goods, you get nothing. All you did was increase the price of goods by lowering the value of money. And I think that's what the frustration is that has led to this point, right? And why you see people cutting back so much, because, yeah, okay, everything's more expensive, but my job has not compensated me accordingly. I have to cut back because I am not, in fact, better off than I was.
It's interesting because I think COVID really woke up, the American industrial and the American, maybe even political system, we hope, right? In the sense that, the concept of globalization was a kind of beautiful idea, right? Mm-hmm. The problem is that every country has their own kind of goals, and not every country has a leader that is willing to kind of do what everybody else is doing, which is sharing, right? So you get a leader that's like is all for themselves or whatever, right? You're subject to whatever the whims of that particular leader is, right? And the second thing that has always, and I've been talking this for, as you know, for about 10, 15 years, right? The challenge I always had with, cheap labor, whether it be China or India or any of the
anywhere,
place, right?
Sweatshops.
Is that you sit here, we say, the labor in this country has to be paid, so we're going to raise the minimum wage to X, right? And they're not great hourly rates, but they're very good compared to the rest of the world. But we're willing to allow companies to go abroad and then hire basically labor at 50 cents on the dollar.
Then if we were doing it here, we
would let them. So in reality, what are we saying? We're saying, for our people, this is not good, and we got principles. Mm-hmm. But for the rest of the world, who cares?
Yeah.
Well, you either got principles because it's inhumane, or you don't have principles, one or the other, right?
Especially because most of those places, let's face it, the wages, a lot of the places where this is occurring, those wages are artificially low. In other words, China's not cheap labor. Sweatshops, like when you do about sweatshops where they do this, fabrics and so forth, all these places, they're not cheap labor because it's an up-and-coming country and prices are also cheap. And so they're cheap labor because they're artificially held back because the country is ruled by a dictator. It's ruled by a corrupt government that takes all the people's money. It's held artificially low by a communist system, right? In other words, there are morally repugnant reasons why the labor is so cheap. Exactly. It's not like, it's cheap now, but in 5 years it'll be the equivalent of the United States. That hasn't happened.
No.
I mean, they let China enter the WTO, 2 decades ago?
Absolutely, yeah.
It hasn't it's not like suddenly...
No, it's done nothing.
They have a free system where you can speak your mind and do whatever. It hasn't transformed anything.
No, it hasn't. And I guess, my feeling is when you think about, how do we bring manufacturing back to this country? How do you bring, medicines back to this country? And isn't it cost us more? And the answer is probably yes. But there's one difference today that we didn't have even like 10 years ago. One is robotics, and the other one is AI, right? So, AI has its, I'm still skeptical a little bit, but it also can produce efficiencies, right, that we didn't have 10 years ago. And robotics is much better than it was. So that which a person did every single day, either concept of threading a needle, right? You can basically have a robot do that, right? And that robot may cost you a one-time fee, but after that labor, you're not paying any medicine. He can work 24 hours a day. So basically, that product eventually will become cheaper. So my point is, at first, yes, can we see increase in prices in certain products and medicines, et cetera? And the answer is yes. Second of all, but once that stabilizes, there won't be an increase in price anymore. That price will stabilize, and if there's efficiencies, right, that price should be able to drop. So are we willing, it's like you said, there's a difference between seeing inflation because of, supply and demand where, you're printing money versus seeing inflation because you want to bring back jobs to this country in a form where, and those people are going to be paying taxes, which is exactly what you want, right? So you bring back jobs, and those jobs, right, eventually those products, they cost you more today, but in 5, 6, 7 years,
well,
they won't
we've
cost you
seen
more.
this when we run financial plans, right? When you run someone's financial plan and you pop in a one-time increase in cost, and then you let inflation go back to some super low level, you don't often see suddenly the whole plan go out of whack. Right? What causes the plan to go out of whack is when you say, well, what happens if inflation is 4% every year for 30 years? It's destroyed. The plan is like your odds of making it plummet.
Right.
What kills people is a consistent too much of an increase in the price level consistently over time, which slams you, right? And so that's what causes the problem. Not okay. It was up 5 one year and then went back to 1 the next, and it stayed at 1, right? It's 9, 7, 6, 3, 3,
and that
3,
compounds, right?
Which compounds.
Just like we love compounding in returns, compound inflation is not good.
That's what really kills the plan. And you can see it because when we run a financial plan for someone who's 30 years away from retirement, what's the biggest risk?
Inflation.
And the inflation stress test we use increases inflation by 1% per year.
And it's amazing.
It's amazing.
What it does.
Increasing inflation by 1% per year over 30 years, biggest possible stress on the financial plan. When someone's three years away from retirement or they're in retirement, how much of the role does inflation play? It's much less.
Yeah,
you didn't increase inflation by 1%, and if they were 95, they're going to go from 95 to 94.
Yeah.
Because they're already there. The number of years for continued inflation to hammer you is limited. So a one-time bump in inflation doesn't cause that problem. It's the consistent inflation, and it's the inflation which has no other benefit other than you printed money, and you printed too much. Because you always print it, right? I mean,
right.
We've been printing money for like 20 years. Japan's been printing money. But I think what we learned is you actually can print too much. You can do a little bit too much in 1 year, and that throws you out of whack if you haven't accounted for the rest of the economic situation.
And the sad part is that taxes are inflation basically is a tax on the middle class and the poor. Mm-hmm. Because in reality, when you are very wealthy, inflation doesn't have as big an impact. Because the thing about what I was going to say about financial plans, the second part that you have to consider is that by the time somebody retires, their nest egg has grown to the point where it's a large nest egg, right? Mm-hmm. And so now you are compounding that by the returns of the market, which is large, right? Mm-hmm. When you're starting from zero and you got 30 years, you're trying to build a nest egg, inflation is eroding constantly, right? that means that your salary has to literally continue to rise at the same pace or more in order for you to eventually get to the place where your nest egg, right, won't be impacted as much by inflation. So it's a double-edged sword in the sense that when you're younger, you don't have a nest egg yet. You're trying to build it, and that inflation continues to erode your ability to do that, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Well, I mean, we've talked about it before, right? It's the reason why we've talked about low interest rates, which typically occur in a low inflation environment, right? Who do they benefit? They benefit borrowers and they hurt savers.
Right.
Borrowers tend to be younger, savers tend to be older. By definition, but savers meaning people who have saved money. In other words, people who have already saved money as opposed to people who are either borrowing or attempting to save. Right? So now inflation just reverses that, right? If you already have the nest egg and inflation goes up and interest rates go up to compensate for that, okay, well, now I'm earning my 7. I was earning 2 on my bonds, now I'm earning 7.
Right.
This helps me compensate. If you're in your 20s, you don't have $300,000, $400,000 sitting in that you can put in bonds. And, well, that's okay, I'm going to earn you're trying to build it, which you now can no longer do.
Right.
You're trying to get into the real estate market, right? Which you can no longer do because you can't get in.
And if you do, you're paying a lot in interest, right?
Exactly.
So
you're paying 7 now,
yeah.
when it would have been a lot easier for you to get in if you were only paying 3.
Right.
So it's the flip side of that classic low interest rates help debtors. Well, but by definition, high interest rate hurts people who are borrowing and helps people who have saved already. Exactly. They say help savers, but in reality, when we say help savers, what it means is people who have already saved.
Yeah.
Because if you are attempting to save based on current income, it doesn't help you.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So I think that's the challenge here is that, okay, looking forward, we will see a different kind of inflationary environment. It doesn't mean we won't see, I don't think we can promise people that the inflationary environment is over, but I think we may see a different kind of inflationary environment. The things which are inflationary may change, right? In other words, we saw a lot of food inflation
right.
over the past several years. If we end up in a trade war with China, the food part is not really what we're going to be looking at. Right, we're going to be looking at inflation in other areas of the market.
Televisions.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, television is one of those things that television is cheaper now than it was 4 years ago. Does that help people? Not really. You know what I mean? Most of your budget is not spent on television.
Exactly.
Right? One area you could potentially see improvement, energy. Energy is a large part of people's budget.
I think energy is a large part think about it. In everything we do, and whether it be a corporation or you as a working person, you heat your house, you put gas in your car. I mean, so much involves energy one way or the other, whether it be oil, gas, nuclear, whatever it may be. And think about, I mean, obviously, if you believe in the AI and everything that is being accomplished by that, those data centers require an enormous amount of energy, right? So energy is critical, right, at this point in time. And without any doubt, when energy prices stable come down, everything else, right, begins to do the same thing, stable come down. Because it impacts everybody. I mean, if you're a trucker and it's like, I'm paying for gas and the gas goes up, I'm going to charge you more to deliver the product. Well, that means that product's going to go up in price. There's nothing else you can do about it.
It has to. And what's interesting is that, I mean, I think from most people, which we try to explain to people, is that unfortunately, inflation for the most part is a one-way street. Right? In other words, you take a look at most things when you see inflation and the prices of things go up, sure, etc. They don't usually go backwards. The area, I think the places where you can potentially see prices actually go down is, one, gas prices, and people have known this for a long time. If gas prices go up to $3 a gallon, they can go back down to $2.50.
Right.
Right. We do see them fluctuate. It's not like, oh no, it'll never go back to $2.95 because it now hit $3. Right. One place to do percentage, you see it, obviously the housing market, housing prices. We've seen it before. Housing prices can come down.
Sure.
Right. Does it mean they'll do it in every market? I mean, in Charlottesville, not necessarily, right? But it is possible for housing prices to come down. So I think there are areas, and I think food, but only to a certain extent. In other words, we're seeing egg prices skyrocket because there's less chickens, because they all died, right? When the chickens come back, the prices will go.
They killed them all. Right?
Well, some of them died and some they killed,
yeah.
But in other words, you bring back you get more chickens, egg prices come down. In other words, if there's a bird flu that makes prices go up, egg prices can come down. In general, though, the overall price level of food is probably not going to turn around and come down. So there are areas where you can potentially see them come down. And energy, like you said, the one thing about energy is that can it make inflation go negative? Probably not. But it can certainly drop inflation. It can drop it from 3 to something else if the energy component manages to go down in there. So there are areas where you could see prices come down. It's just the overall price level is not likely.
Yeah, it's very sticky. Inflation
it's very sticky.
In most products, it's pretty sticky. Mm-hmm. It's rare for a company to say, gas prices are down and our salaries aren't really kept up with inflation, therefore I'm going to lower the price of the product. No.
Exactly.
Because let's be honest, it's again, supply and demand. If the demand continues to be strong for what you're selling, well, why would you then drop the price? You can sell it, then go ahead, right? And that's how companies work. If I raise the price, people buying less, they stop buying. If that's the answer, if the answer is yes, then obviously that price was too high, and that's how it works. So as long as people are buying what you are selling, you're not going to lower the price, right? That's not how it works.
Which, it's funny. I think people don't, for the most part, now monopolies may be different, but for the most part, companies do not set prices by sitting around saying, okay, who can I screw today? Right? Who can I, okay, I'm going to steal some money from average Joe today by raising the price. No. The company is going to basically use the market to determine what the price is. It's like, man, if I raised it and people bought less, got to lower it. Oh, I lowered it and people bought more, I got to raise it. Right? In other words, they're trying to find the equilibrium, which every single person does. In other words, if I told you tomorrow, you can go to your employer and ask for $10,000 more a year, and he'll have to give it to you because he can't find someone else. Who would say, I can't do that to my boss? That would be a terrible thing to do. He's paying me good. I couldn't knowingly.
Yeah, I can't hold him up for another 10 grand.
I can't hold him up for more money. You know what I mean? You would do it, right? Yeah. And you would do it up to the point at which I say, if you asked your boss for another $5,000, he's going to say no and hire this guy instead.
Yeah.
Right? Then you say, okay, I'm not going to ask him for the $5,000. But if I told you could ask him for another $30,000 and he'd give it to you because he has no choice, because his demand is unchanged, you do it. You say, well, he can obviously afford.
And if you're a nice guy, you ask for $29,000.
Yeah, exactly. But you'd sit there and say, well, he can obviously afford. He's making, remember, there's two ways. This word profit is what we call supplier surplus. In other words, profit is the difference between what the supplier gets and what he could still sell you the product at and still be in existence.
Right.
Consumer surplus exists. It's the difference between what you paid for this thing and what you would have paid for it. So if you're sitting there, now we all often think of it that way, right? If I'm buying a television and the television costs $300, but deep down, I would have bought it for $500. Then I have a $200 surplus, consumer surplus, because I would have paid $500. But instead, the market price, because of everybody else, was $300, and I made the money. We don't call ourselves greedy and say, I would have paid $500, so I probably should have paid $500, because I would have been willing to do that. Right? Nobody, like Milton Friedman said, no, I'm never the greedy one. It's the other guy who's greedy, right? So we don't think, but that's how the whole market works. And that's why inflation is sticky, because if the demand still stays and the supply is still there, the price is not going to go down until people buy less.
Yeah.
So the one place where it's not sticky is energy, because they're actually, I think what people don't realize, it's funny, the one place where people assume there's no, that there's collusion and there's no market is the one place where there's the most actual competition. Because I'll always hear people say, you've heard the story, right? Oh man, the gas companies, they collude with each other, because if you look down the street, everybody's selling gas for the same price, right? And I'm like, you do realize that's the opposite of collusion. Like the reason that when this guy is $297, that guy is $297 is because if he was $305,
nobody go there.
You can see both of them.
Exactly.
Right? You would be like, well, I'm not going to buy his gas when this dude is $297 because he's cheaper. Right? I'm going to go to his. So it's literally the one. So what happens? He lowers his price to $297. And so it's literally the one industry where you can't, there's so much competition that the prices have to converge at the actual price level. So that's the reason.
The guy for $297 has such long lines. It says, I'm going to raise it to $299, right?
Exactly. Because when a bunch of people go to the $297 guy, he's like, okay, can I get away with $299? Right? And that's the reason why it's an industry where it can actually go down. But as the price of oil goes down, if suddenly there's a bunch more oil, they can't get away, your gas station can't get away with $305 because somebody's going to say, well, if I go down to $295, I'm still making money, and all his customers will come to me instead. So it's the one place you can't get away with it because there's literally 4 of them on a street.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's why you can see it, because it's not sticky. It's very elastic and it's elastic because it's identical. Nobody cares who they buy their gas from. I mean, with the exception of, you probably got the 1 or 2 listeners that are like, not Shell. Shell is way, it's the premium gas, right? But for the most part,
I was going to say the difference is, if there's a gas station that says cheap gas and the other one says Shell, or Exxon or whatever it may be, it's like, I'm not sure. I want to go to cheap gas.
Yeah.
The 5 cents cheaper because is there water in there? What kind of gasoline?
Yeah. So you know what? 99% of people go to cheap gas. It's like, okay, Exxon or Shell. I don't care that the Shell looks nicer than the Exxon.
But if you're driving a BMW, probably not.
Exactly. So, but I'm saying for the most part, it's not. It's elastic.
Exactly. Right? No doubt about it.
And so that's why it's able to come down the way that it does.
Yeah.
Why is it so hard for rent to come down? Because for the most part, it's not elastic, right?
No, it isn't.
It costs you to move. So, okay, if I'm paying $1,600 a month for rent and I find out that the guy down the street is $1,550 a month, am I really going to move?
Yeah.
Really.
It's a lot of work and effort for $50 a month.
Yeah, so he has no incentive to go to $1,550 because I'm not moving. So he's going to stay at $1,600. My guy's going to jack me up to $1,700. He says, you're probably still not going to move.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so much harder for that to come down. So I think people got to realize there are places where we could still see prices come down despite tariffs, and there are places where you probably won't see prices come down.
Yeah.
Because it's not reasonable to expect them to come down in those industries.
Yeah. And let's be, we also forget, there were tariffs during those 4 years of that administration, right?
And, they kept the China tariffs.
So inflation was still low. Right? We didn't have high inflation. So, again, it depends on the tariffs. It depends who you're putting the tariffs on, and it depends on what you're getting back for it. Mm-hmm. Right? And so, as you very eloquently indicated, oil prices, gas prices, energy prices are the key to just about any economy.
Yeah.
So when that goes
Trump
down,
1.0 had China tariffs, and Biden kept the China tariffs. We didn't drop them.
Yeah.
They've still been around. So now the question is, okay, can you get even more to come back by upping that? I think, what is that, another 10%?
10%, yeah.
That is what the term situation is.
Exactly, yeah.
So, and it's very similar to the supply and demand. In other words, how much can you increase tariffs
before the demand
before your
drops?
pain is greater than the other guy's
Exactly,
pain.
yeah. Because it's true. All of a sudden you come here and say, wow, so that product is $9, but it's made abroad, and that product's $10 made in U.S., and I'll pay the $10 because it's made in U.S., So all of a sudden he's sitting there going, I can't charge $9 anymore. I got to charge less, right? Because nobody's buying my product. Mm-hmm. And at that point, it's like, we can't make any money. So, you begin to negotiate.
Mm-hmm.
How can we?
Well, remember, it's always harder. The pain is always greater on the exporter than the importer, because let's say the product now costs 10% more. If that causes me as the consumer to buy this American one that's now 10% more, right? I switched from imported product to domestic product. Now, domestic product is more expensive. So how much did this hurt me? It hurt me the 10%. Because now I have to buy a domestic product, which is 10% more expensive than imported product.
Right.
from the perspective of imported product die, how much did he lose? He just lost 100% of my money.
Yeah, because he didn't sell anything.
Yeah, so he was selling it to me, and now he made $0 from me. So the switch hurts imported die more than domestic die, as long as there's a domestic alternative. Obviously, if you put a tariff on Italian olives, I can't, and there's no domestic olives, then it doesn't matter. I'm still buying Italian olives. But we're obviously the theory here is you're putting it on products for which there are domestic alternatives. That's the point, right?
Right.
And so the question is, who's paying? What's the price point, the tariff point at which my pain is too great? My pain is that 50% more is too much for me to handle it, even though the other guy is making no money. He holds out long enough that the pain is too great. So where is the magic point where his pain is greater?
Do I rather swallow a 10% loss than 100% loss?
Exactly. His pain is greater where he says, all right, I'll do what you need me to do. I might even take some tariffs off your stuff in exchange for you taking it off mine, because I need you to buy my stuff more than you need to buy my stuff for cheap.
Right.
So that's where I think we're going to find out where that point is.
Yeah, that's an equilibrium, right? So, and it takes time. That's the whole point. It's not immediate. It takes time, and we'll find out. We'll find out.
We certainly will.
But it's not the end of the world, I don't believe.
Yeah,
I did want to touch, and I know that you said
that
you had quickly talked about this last week a little bit, but the drop in NVIDIA when all of a sudden DeepSeek came out, and although we found out DeepSeek is really not absolutely,
Exactly.
It's not what everybody expected. You realize that NVIDIA dropped 20% when that news came out. It's still down 15%, right? So we were talking about this where there are a number of companies whose valuations are extremely high. And you sit there and go, they're just, they're very, their price is such that any news, anything that comes out can deflate that price rapidly, right? And whether or not it goes back to where it was, it may, and I'm not saying it won't, but it may take some time, because when you look at the markets, right? I mean, the S&P 500 is still up since 123, which is when this happened, right? Since January 23rd. I think the S&P is down about 1%. An equal weighted S&P is down 0.5%, right? So those top like 4 or 5 companies, right? They're very there was a word I was looking for, but
expensive.
Well, they're expensive, but they're so, it's like a balloon. They've expanded so fast, so quickly, especially the last 2 years, that anything can burst them, right? And NVIDIA is a perfect example. And again, NVIDIA is in a very strong position because they still have a chip that nobody else has. Eventually, I'm sure they'll have competition, but right now they don't, right? I mean, the demand for the chips is greater than the supply, and therefore that makes that company extremely valuable.
Which we actually didn't touch on this. Michael and I didn't touch on this last week, but I had done some further research since then. DeepSeek still uses NVIDIA chips. It uses the older model of chips.
Right.
The reason it doesn't use the newer model of chips is because it is a Chinese company. It's not allowed to get them. The United States has restricted the sale of those chips to Chinese companies. So in other words, it's not as though DeepSeek was like, this is the model of the future.
Yeah, we figured out.
We should be using these older model chips. No other company's going to want to use the older model chips. There's a reason they're the older model. Right? So going forward, it's not as though it's not as though OpenAI is going to be like, wow, we should use these older NVIDIA chips too because we can do it for $6 million. It's like, no, why on earth would you do that? Right. They did it because they legally couldn't get their hands on it. Some people even question whether that's true. In other words, if they are lying and they have the newer chips but don't want to divulge that they have them, then that makes this whole thing complete bogus.
Yeah,
In other words, if DeepSeek actually did have newer NVIDIA chips, which they legally are not supposed to have, would they say it? Would China be like, yeah, actually we are getting shipments of...
But somebody's subsidizing, so that means the government's subsidizing because the company won't be able to do that.
Yeah, no,
right?
Well, it means they're legally acquiring them. They legally can't get their hands on them.
Quote unquote. Okay.
Yeah, in other words, if DeepSeek,
what you're saying is they're stealing them.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
If DeepSeek had the type of chip that they're not allowed to get.
I thought you were saying they kind of bought them underneath the table.
No.
What you're saying is,
what I'm saying is
basically.
in other words, if DeepSeek had into their possession, if their servers are running on a chip that they legally are not allowed to possess, because supposedly China can't get them, and they did possess them, would they say it? Be like, yeah, we're running on NVIDIA 500 chips. And say, wait a second, I thought we banned those from you. So there's a lot of question marks there. But like you said, it's not really an indictment of NVIDIA, except to the extent to which NVIDIA may have been slightly overvalued because of a little bit of euphoria.
Yeah. I mean, those stocks have, they've just been, they skyrocketed. And we've talked about this. I mean, when the top 10 stocks in the entire U.S. stock market represent over 30% of the value, that says something. That's 10 over, like there's 3,700 or more stocks, right, in those universes. That says something, right? So the question is, can they continue that pace? And it's questionable. We've seen that before. Back in 1963, you had Exxon, IBM, General Motors. Who was the other one?
The funny is, you looked at all of those
AT&T.
companies. You think about those companies. Did they continue their pace? Are they still growing by, 10, 15% a year now?
Yeah.
I mean, granted, we're several
they're
decades
solid.
later.
They're solid companies. They're big companies,
but they don't
grow. They're not growing at the 20-25% pace that they will grow to get to where they were.
Exactly.
Right? That's the whole point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that changes the calculus there.
Yeah. And the thing is, that's what I would say. So the thing is, you have so many investment funds out there that have these different names, and you're thinking, that's a great name. I can diversify my portfolio by buying that particular ETF or mutual fund or whatever. And you buy 10 different ETFs or mutual funds. And if you look deep inside, you say, wait a minute, every single one of those ETFs has NVIDIA, has Tesla, has Amazon and Meta. And you say, so if that's the case, then my portfolio is heavily weighted greater than the market. And so that's where I say you have to be careful, because you want to be the market and have 30%, that's fine. It is the market. And if that market crashes, you're crashing along with the market. But if you're now 45, 50%, and those funds eventually start not declining, but reducing their growth from 20, 25 to maybe 10, and the market's still growing 20, you are devaluing. You're not keeping up with the market, right?
Exactly. Just to show you, right? Because I think most people would say ExxonMobil is still a solid company, right? It's paying a dividend and so forth, right? Its price to earnings ratio is 14. Right, NVIDIA's trailing PE. Now this was like as
55.
I mean, it's now.
It dropped 20%. Well,
it's now 49.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So in other words, at a certain point, it's not so much that NVIDIA ceases to be a good company, right? Because Exxon still makes money. Exxon makes money. It pays their dividends and so forth. But at some point, can your price to earnings ratio remain 50?
Right.
Right, 2 decades down the road, are you really going to be still at a price to earnings ratio? Meaning, in other words, what you're paying for the stock is 50 times the expected 50 times the dividend. Meaning, 50 years worth of dividends, you don't make your money back.
Yeah.
All right. So, at some point, and then you can be a good company and a successful company and still have a 14 PE ratio because you're just a solid company. What's probably not sustainable is 50, 60, 70, 80 indefinitely. You can have it for years, but you probably can't do it indefinitely.
Yeah. I mean, you look at those, let's face it, you look at those big companies like the Costcos of the world, the Exxons. I mean Exxon and ExxonMobil, et cetera, they're also subject to oil prices. When oil prices come down, the value of those companies is reduced, right? But things like Costco, right? Pepsi, Coca-Cola, et cetera. PG&E, right? Procter & Gamble. Those companies are huge, right? They have very strong dividends. So when you look at them, they're not growing. They're not going to grow at 20, 25%. but they may be growing at 10 to 15% per annum, or somewhere between 8 to 15%, right?
Total 26 price earnings, so it's still.
So when you look at them, the thing is, at what point in your investment cycle are you? And there's a certain point where you say, I want that consistency where I know I'm going to be between 8 and 15, because as you have said so many times, at 7% every 10 years you double your money. At 10% every 7 years you double your money. So if I can double my money between 7 and 8 years, right, every 7, 8 years by buying these solid companies, right, then that's a great, that's a great strategy, right? So the other ones, you just sit there and you go, they've had a great run. Hopefully you own them, right? The question is this the time to go all in on them, or is this the time to say, I need to do the research and find out how exposed I am to all those particular companies, right? And again, they could have another magnificent year this year, but sooner or later, it's not going to, it's impossible to continue to have that kind of growth rate.
Exactly. So it's something to keep in mind.
Yeah.
I think, as we were trying to say last week, it's not so much that you need to panic over this news, but I think this is a good wake-up call for people to say, okay, how much you buy the S&P 500 thinking you own 500 stocks, not realizing that 30% of your investment is in 10.
Yeah.
And
in that case, it's in 5.
5, you're right.
Yeah.
30% of your investment is in 5 stocks. So I think it's a good thing to people be aware of that, because what that means is if one of those 5 stocks goes down 15% in a day, it is dragging down your entire portfolio, even if the other 499 went up.
Yeah. That's what happened. Nvidia was down 15%, the S&P is down 1%, right? Yeah. And I guarantee you that a lot of that is Nvidia, right? And it's fine. It's an index, and therefore you at the same time you are diversified, because you didn't go down 15, you went down 1.
Exactly.
My point is not so much just on the S&P 500, but when you say I'm going to buy the S&P 500 and this particular ETF and that particular ETF, and you think, I'm diversifying, you need to look into these funds and saying, what do they own, and make sure that their top stock is in the same one, Apple and Nvidia and Meta, because
I would say actively managed funds.
Yes.
Because the problem is a lot of actively managed funds, you think, okay, I'm paying 2% or 5% front load because this guy is pitching stocks. He's not just doing the indies, he's pitching them. Okay, he may be pitching them. Is he really going to bet against
those 5 stocks?
Those 5 stocks. And if he's not betting against them and he's weighting them the same way that they are weighted in the market, then you are going to be overexposed.
Yeah. And you're paying a lot more for the same return.
For very similar exposure.
Yeah.
Because is he really going to take the risk of intentionally underweighting those stocks? And if he doesn't do that, your actively managed fund is taking the same risk, or not an extremely similar risk, to the passive funds that are already in your portfolio. And you could be doubling down on some of these things big time. We found people who 4% of their portfolio was Microsoft. Yeah. And they're like, no, I've got 20 funds. I'm like, yeah, but every fund has Microsoft. Yeah. So it's important to keep in mind. Yeah. All righty. So that's
been fun.
We filled an hour. Always enjoyable.
It's easy.
Always good to chat some finance. It's been great. Thanks everyone for tuning in this morning. Definitely appreciate all our people, all our fantastic viewers. We'll be back so we're on our new schedule. So we'll be back in a couple weeks.
2 weeks. That's right.
No, we'll look forward to seeing everyone then. Until then, it's been good. Thanks, Judah, making us look good. Thanks, Xavier, for being here with me. It's good
Thank
to
you.
be.
It's been
I haven't
fun.
been on with you in
a long time. Yes, I know.
Over a month. So that was fun.
Yeah, I don't think we've been on this year.
Probably not.
I don't know really.
And then big thanks, of course, to I Love CVille Network, to all our fantastic partners, to Matthias Realty, to Craddock Insurance, to Charlottesville Opera, of course, our fantastic presenter, Emergent Financial Services. Always appreciate that. And all our viewers. We appreciate all of you. We hope you stay safe this week and also next week. If a winter storm comes through, stay safe, stay dry, try to stay warm. We look forward to seeing you in a couple weeks. But until that time, as we'd like to close it out, hasta mañana.
Well done, fellas.
That was a fun one.